No, I'm going to sit here, so you can just look at me and we can just have a discussion, so you don't
Sure.
have to look right at
No.
it. Yeah, but, yeah, so.
No, but it's better if it's for the purpose of a transcript in your report.
Yeah.
Then we can go longer or shorter, depending on.
Yeah,
What you want,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Well, we'll see how we go. You're actually the first person I talked to, so,
Oh, okay.
yeah, so we'll go from there. Do you have any questions before we get started, or?
Well, I guess we've been discussing that.
Sure, no, I just wondered if you do or anything, if there's anything, any concerns.
No,
questions?
I think I understand what the association wants and why,
Okay,
so
okay.
happy to cooperate.
Good. Well, thank you very much. First question I guess I'll ask you is, you've obviously made the decision to run for mayor, and congratulations on doing that. There's obviously going to be a number of issues that the next mayor and council are going to be addressing. So where does infrastructure rank for you as a candidate in terms of the overall priority list, in terms of the things that we need to deal with as a city?
Well, if you've been following me, you'll realize I've been going to City Hall now steadily for about a year and a half, because I've been rather unhappy with what I've found with regard to how decisions are being made and so forth. And in the end, I decided, following the last council meeting, that if things are going to change, that perhaps I should offer to do it myself. So I decided to run for mayor, because I do believe I have the experience and the knowledge to actually make the changes. To me, the most important thing is going to be to overhaul City Hall.
Okay.
The senior administration, I believe, needs to have a serious overhaul. And also relationships between council and the administration, which I think are sadly lacking. I see a significant requirement, first day, to establish a working majority of council, which has a program, we can work together, and to then put in place new senior administration in a methodical and fair way to make sure that we have good management, because without good management, it doesn't matter what we're doing, it's going to fall apart.
Right.
As a second priority, we'll be looking at the 2015 budget, both operating and capital, immediately. And we're going to have to make decisions on what to do this coming year. But it should be in the context of a longer range plan for, in this case, infrastructure. I mean, obviously, we're looking at operating costs as well, but the city's engaged in major projects and has many on the plans. So I see the infrastructure, maintenance, rehabilitation, and replacement and expansion where appropriate as being some of the major decisions that city council and city administration need to work through with public oversight, because we've reached a situation now where people who might be prepared to pay more taxes are reluctant if it's just going to be wasted.
Right.
And I think we have to reestablish some trust between the public and council if we are to get their support and agreement to fund properly the very large amount of work that needs to be done in the city. So in that sense, infrastructure is, if you will, my second choice as a priority, but an immediate one.
But they're tied. It's tied into the other program that you have. Now, to what extent are you familiar with the Infrastructure Funding Council report? Because this was a document that the Manitoba Heavy Construction Association was involved in that talked about a long-term plan for financing infrastructure in the province and in the city. To what extent, can you tell me a little bit about your familiarity with your report and its recommendations?
Well, I have skimmed the report, so I'm familiar with the actually excellent work, I think, that was done in terms of research on the needs and requirements and options for funding in cooperation with the senior levels of government and with our neighbors in the capital region, using a variety of techniques. And I have not much difficulty in agreeing with the overall approach, and I can talk about that further. But it's, I think, an excellent document, and I have to admit, in looking at it, because basically I've been following council's agenda. It has not been on council's agenda. And in fact, as far as I can tell, back in 2011, council received as information, like they do so many other things, asked the public service to respond to it, and literally nothing has happened. To me, that is so irresponsible. And so I see that particular document, plus others related to the infrastructure, as providing a really good starting point for the new council and new administration to start making the right decisions engaged with the public, and the budget process, consultation process, which is actually underway now and which is intended to feed into the new council and make it at least possible to begin a dialogue with some basis of understanding with the public. So,
with the IFC report recommendations, I mean, what are some of your ideas about how you will try and implement those?
And a very important one is to work together with the other levels of government. And it's easy to say, but I would refer to it in some of my materials as applying the right diplomatic skills to work with other levels of government in a constructive and cooperative way, which is really what Winnipeggers are used to doing, which we've done in the past, which I've done in the past. If you're familiar with my background, I've worked for the provincial government for many years, dealing with the city of Winnipeg and dealing with tri-level partnerships to do with urban development, things like the core area agreement, but other things. I was engaged in national conferences, tri-level partnerships with the Federation of Mayors and Municipalities at the time, and the housing programs. And so I'm quite familiar with that process. I'm familiar with the actors, and I really do believe that I can do much a better job of this starting day one. I did talk with Kevin Chief the other day, and I was talking about how things used to be with an Urban Affairs Committee of Cabinet meeting almost every month with the Executive Policy Committee to discuss matters of common interest. I think we need to open up the doors and work together.
So would you go back to something like that? Or
Yeah,
like as far
absolutely.
as, like, I guess, as a high-level meeting of
Yeah, with the administration
provincial-
involved as necessary and cooperative, but I think if we can't afford the luxury of islands, we need to work together. And the same applies to the federal government. Regardless of political differences, everybody shares a common interest in doing the right thing. And it's demonstrated in the past, and is now today from time to time on different issues. But I think we can be more systematic about it.
Right.
And I would see that as a priority and an important part of the puzzle in dealing with the infrastructure shortcomings. Not the only thing. We have to have our own house in order. Some of the ideas about being more efficient and effective in what we do is important. I was astounded the city engaged KPMG to do an operational review of the Public Works Department. And whatever the merits of that report, at least they did do a study of how things could be improved within that focus. Council has given them a year to come back with recommendations for implementation the following year. That's not serious. That's not a serious approach.
Well, what should they do instead?
Well, they should be either saying, these are not practical, we're not going to do it, or these are practical things, and here's how we're going to start doing it day one, day two, day three, and improve things. But the idea that somehow we'll get around to having a look at possibilities of making things more efficient and more effective, maybe a year from now. That's the kind of lackadaisical approach that City Council has allowed or permitted or put up with, which I sure hope the new council is not going to accept.
Right. So you would, if you were elected, you would go about that. You would go try to do it in a different way.
Yeah, I would expect, you can expect that there will be a response from the administration to the direction from the city's board of directors, if you will, the council, setting policy but expecting performance, or like any government, provincial or federal cabinet does for sure.
Right.
And expect that. And if we find that we need to change or add to the capacity to handle these major decisions, then that's the wise thing to do. I don't think citizens have any idea the scope of the existing capital investment program that the city has going or has done in the water treatment plants, in the sewage treatment plants, in the transportation projects which are underway, and those which they would like to have underway. And that's not counting all of the things that people are aware of, the streets and the potholes and the brown water, and the brown water is the water treatment plant, but those kinds of things as well. The scope of what's required is large. And it shouldn't be an afterthought, and it shouldn't be something occasionally reported. One of the things I've been after committees about is getting the administration to report regularly on the progress of all these systems. And I'll give you an example, is the sewage treatment plant. The environmental license for the existing plant expires at the end of 2015. The city has told the province that they can't get it fixed and the new system in place until later the following year. But the two parties haven't reached agreement on that. And, you know, either the province changes the deadline, which is of concern to those who are concerned about Lake Winnipeg, or the city has to find a better way of getting the job done sooner. But to just leave it sitting there unresolved is, to me, irresponsible. I think there's all sorts of room for working together. And there were some good ideas, I think, floated recently by some of the councillors asking questions about the possibility of greater cooperation between the engineers and designers of the province and the city. There's a recognition that everyone's going out to tender at the same time. There's only so much work, and there's only so many suppliers, members of the association. That perhaps it's not as coordinated as it might be in order to have a steady flow of work for the capacity that we have to do this kind of construction, and have it better coordinated between the provincial government and the city, and possibly the federal government as well. And there's room to do that in a way, in a cooperative way with the association too, I think.
So, you know, that's one aspect of it, and I'm sort of getting a sense from you that, you know, better cooperation, greater cooperation, that's going to lead to a lot of these, it's going to lead to a lot better planning and a lot better outcomes. But as far as sort of addressing specific aspects of the infrastructure deficit that we have, and I mean, that's a very, you know, that's a big term, and it's very multifaceted kind of a thing. How would you go about addressing that?
Well, to begin with, I like the point being made in the, I guess it was the Canada West study, that there are two things. There's the deficit and there's the debt. And the infrastructure deficit, well, excuse me, infrastructure debt would be the total amount of work that's required to replace and provide for the infrastructure that we have and we need. And that's a big number, a very big number. And then there's what's referred to, or should be referred to, as the infrastructure deficit, and that would reflect, like in budgetary terms, the fact that each year we are spending much less than we should be spending in order to maintain and develop the infrastructure. And that's the key number to me, really, is the amount that we're short every year in investment in the infrastructure we need. And that is a big number too. So it's still a huge challenge. And in the various reports that the president of the association and others have participated, they've looked at ways of increasing revenues by the city, a greater share of revenues from senior governments, possible, looking at ways of doing things more efficiently and more effectively, choosing the right things to invest in, which is an important thing. And the solution will be the best we can make of all of those things. And I wouldn't rule out anyone in particular. I certainly would have personal preferences about sources of revenue.
Well,
but it has to be something which in the end the community accepts as being appropriate.
What would you say would be the personal, what would you personally favor if you were to think about the ways that addressing this infrastructure deficit could be financed? I mean, what specific mechanisms would you look at if you were mayor?
Yeah, okay. I would certainly be prepared to use city municipal debt to borrowing for projects which have a long-term life, and in effect, like the mortgage on your house, you'll be paying for it over the time that you enjoy the benefit of it. That, to me, makes some sense. Be very concerned about borrowing to finance this year's groceries, which, of course, some governments find they have to do. And there are cyclical reasons and employment reasons why senior governments will do that. But the city of Winnipeg does not have that luxury. It is required to balance its budget in that sense every year. So raising municipal taxes is something which we have to consider. On the one hand, the city will proudly state that we have the lowest average taxes for residents and an average residential home across the country, and at the same time say we need more money. Well, which is it? My sense of it is that, as I said earlier, that Winnipeggers would be willing to contemplate higher levels of municipal property tax if they thought they were going to get value for their money. And I'm not so sure they feel that way right now.
Right.
There is a possibility of various shifts in revenue involving the provincial government, and different techniques are referred to it, but they all add up to the same thing, less for the province and more for the city. So that's the question, as to what extent.
Is there a particular mechanism in that respect that you would look
Well,
at in terms of trying to?
we already have in revenue sharing where a seventh of the provincial sales tax comes to the city
Yeah.
automatically, no strings attached really. And, you've got things like the province sharing and transit expenditures, 50% dollars, which encourages the development of transit. There's a question of school financing and room on the tax base. One of the options suggested is that if the province paid more of the costs of education on the provincial tax base, income and otherwise, then there would be more room, if you will, for the municipalities to tax. And that, I say, is an example of, however you look at it, it's still a shift from provincial, other sources of provincial revenue to the city. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I guess it's important to say when you're talking about this kind of thing, everybody has different views and different needs and different concerns. And I say everybody, different levels of government and the citizens. And we need to pay attention to all of them and try to find a solution which makes sense to everybody. Something I used to do when we would negotiate some major developments with the development sector, who would come in with a particular idea for a tax incentive or an adjustment here or adjustment there. They were trying to solve the problem, and I basically said on behalf of the government, well, how much do you need? We'll figure out the tolerable way of getting that amount of money. Don't try and tell us what our tax policy should be, but let's talk about what the need is and the justification for it. Is it worth doing? And then let's use some creative thinking on the part of the other parties at the table.
But so if I can just kind of sum up, what you're saying is that you would look at all of these different mechanisms.
I wouldn't rule it. I wouldn't rule it anything. You wouldn't rule.
There's nothing you would say. What? I wouldn't.
If you ask me, should we have toll roads? And my first reaction is no. I don't think so. But I'm prepared to.
You would study it.
I'm prepared to listen, look at it, and see. There are. Well, something like, for example, the Burlington Skyway, which had a problem. You had a bridge with congestion, and you have a Newton Bridge, which was easy traveling.
Yeah.
If you wanted to go over the fast bridge, you paid for that bridge. And if you didn't, you had an option.
Yeah.
So.
What about something like selling city-owned assets and using that to pay for infrastructure? That's an idea that's been suggested.
In principle, personally, I would be opposed to that. There may be some assets we have that are genuinely surplus to our needs, and if there is some more productive use that can be made of them, then I would not rule that out. But the idea that we should deliberately attempt to sell off our green space, sell off our future rights of way for transportation corridors, the kind of thing which has been going on for too long in the city, and it was about to happen last spring again, I would oppose that personally.
Yeah. Okay. What about building major infrastructure through public-private partnerships?
I'm open to that, but I would like to see it justified.
In what way?
Well, in the way that the best practices would indicate and the provincial legislation would suggest is required, where one can demonstrate that the transfer of certain risks involved in the project to the private sector can be handled in such a way that it will result in less cost to the public sector who's paying for the project. And there are also a variety of ways in which the private sector may find a better mousetrap, a better way of doing it, and that, in principle, is possible. The whole process requires that if one is to implement a P3 project, that one prepares an analysis of the options, including traditional construction and maintenance and funding and financing versus the various forms of public-private partnership, because there's a variety, and a comparison between them as to whether or not there's a justification and an improvement in the position, if you will, of the public sector in using that methodology. What you ought not to do is exactly what the city is currently doing with what they call the Capital Integration Project, which is the Southwest Transitway and Pembina Highway Underpass. They refuse to release the value for money or cost-benefit analysis study. They will not release it. They've sent it to Ottawa. They are required by provincial legislation to make it public before a public hearing, but they have not done that. They will not do it, and I've made an access to information request for the documents. But until such time as they comply with that and can show that in fact the project is justified in that way, I'm opposed to doing it. I have certain other concerns about that particular project because of the alignment that as council has approved to redirect the route to the Parker lands, and that's one particular issue. Mm-hmm. But on the question you're asking,
when it comes to the public-private,
I was personally prepared to see those reports to examine the assumptions and the analysis, and to be shown why, if the project were undertaken that way, which the federal government, by the way, requires if you want to dip into that pot of money, you have to do that, mm-hmm. And to see whether it would in fact be justified. And if so, I have no problem with doing something which is in the interest of the citizens of Winnipeg. Okay, but to do what currently is proposed, where there's no justification, there's no explanation, to me that's not how it would be done. And I presume that the members of the association would not agree with that either. I presume they would be disappointed that the city administration is treating it this way. I would expect, by the way, that if I am elected, that we will be reviewing that project immediately, mm-hmm. along with everything else.
Right.
I mean, we're busy spending significant monies on design for a route which I think will never be built, and for a project which makes no sense, and which actually will cost $1 billion as proposed. And you have to ask yourself, well, is that really the priority for what we have to do with our infrastructure program? Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I'm in favor of public transit, and I'm in favor of rapid transit, and I'm in favor of downtown to the University of Manitoba as the first route. But we shouldn't be doing it this way.
No.
No. Okay.
Okay. As far as the, well, I mean, I'm glad you kind of touched on that point, but then also, I also would like to know as well, when it comes to sort of major infrastructure projects, we look at major transportation or other types of infrastructure projects in the city. I mean, are there particular ones that you would prioritize over others? I mean, are there things that in terms of what's required, where you look at, okay, this is where, there's only so much money that can be spent. These are the ones where I think, really we need to be putting our money into these particular projects.
Mm-hmm. Well, urban transportation broadly is a major requirement, and that includes transit as well as the roadways and active transportation, which is important. Mm-hmm. And in terms of determining which is the priorities among the various projects, that's the importance of having good traffic analysis, good policy analysis, and a discussion, including values, mm-hmm. as to what's important. I go back a long way. I mean, I originally was involved with the city as a reporter for the Winnipeg Tribune, covering City Hall and Metropolitan Corporation of Winnipeg back in '65. So I go back that far. Mm-hmm. And I know that Metro Council prepared 50-year plans for transportation and water and sewer and so on, and which was a real benefit of the Metro government at that time. And the Winnipeg Area Transportation Study was designed to understand origin and destination movement in the city, projected development, and to look at trip times and standards. And for example, this is a long way back, if you wanted to be able to get anywhere in 20 minutes, then this is the number of freeways you need. If you're prepared to tolerate 30 minutes, then it's a different design. Well, that's rational at least, and there should be some rationality in picking those intersections or routes or bottlenecks or future requirements for traffic that we give priority to. Related to that is the whole business of urban sprawl versus infill development, dense development. That's well, it's kind of a difficult thing where everybody wants to do everything, and perhaps we need to make some choices about whether or not we allow for this bill. And of course, that is not only a Winnipeg issue, that is a capital region
Well,
and
yeah,
provincial issue. I mean,
I was going to say
very much.
Yeah. I was going to say. I mean, yeah. The city of Winnipeg, obviously, it's the major city in the region, but I mean, it is part of a region, right? The capital region.
Oh, yeah.
And so, as a city, I guess, what's your vision or what's your plan in terms of being able to better promote or better manage infrastructure on that regional basis? We're talking about the whole capital region.
I mean, I would, to begin with, at least take the existing system as given. That we have separate municipalities, separate planning districts. We have a provincial government with authority over both, actually, on the development plan level. And therefore, given that structure, it's not as if the city can insist that something happens or doesn't happen outside our boundaries. But we can sure be engaged on a regular basis, both at the political and the staff level, with the members of the capital region and the provincial authorities in order to consider the impact and interrelationships, both the problems that can be caused as well as the opportunities that may exist through cooperative approach to things. And I think a lot's possible there. If you look at the Centerport development in Rosser, I've had nothing to do with that decision and those developments, but it doesn't look very good to find that they couldn't proceed with development until they sorted out the provision of water, and then they're building a water treatment plant rather than plugging into the city of Winnipeg system, because Band 40, which I've negotiated with in the past at Shoal Lake, was correctly saying, well, wait a minute, we have an interest in this matter. Well, you should be aware of these things and deal with them properly.
So if you were mayor, what would you do differently with something like that? Or
with that?
Yeah, or just those types of projects or those types of incidents where you are dealing with. You do have multiple, you do have multiple jurisdictions, and there can be conflicts, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The Walmart out at North Kelowna is an example.
That's another example,
Yeah. And you can't solve everything, but you can certainly find ways of accommodating reasonable interests on the part of many parties, or having it adjudicated at the right level. Where in the end, at this point, the provincial government would be responsible for resolving it. That matter, for example, is being referred to the municipal board. I don't appear before the board on planning matters, which is that, but I know them well from appearing on assessment matters for the last 20 years. So I'm familiar with that process.
Sure.
And but even though the city is the largest by far municipality, and has all these resources, these are separate governments, and we would need to deal with them respectfully and seriously, listening to their desire to grow, their aspirations, and what's reasonable. I take you back to Metro days. There's a certain extent the Metropolitan Corporation, which had planning control over those ex-urban locations, they basically didn't allow development. Well, maybe that wasn't fair either. But now we've got a lot of development occurring and prevented by the province, which you have to realize when you allow development, it's not just the sewer pipe or the water pipe, it's the schools and it's the hospitals and it's the transit service and it's libraries and it's hydro and gas and all of that.
Well, I was going to say, we talk about infrastructure. It's defined in the IFC report. It's defined elsewhere as being defined either as core infrastructure, streets, roads, water, all that.
Yeah.
And then the social infrastructure aspect of it,
Yeah.
recreation, libraries, etc. So where would, as mayor, if you became mayor, how would you try to strike a balance, or where would you put the priority in terms of trying to make the investments in these different types of infrastructure where there are needs?
Well, I find myself saying that we expect our city government to supply clean, clear water.
Mm-hmm. We
expect our city government to dispose of our waste, whether it's sewage or dry waste, in an environmentally sound manner. And I might say, just in passing, that if you look at some of the city's reports on their solid waste disposal, there's some very good stories there about diverting things from the landfill to recycling and other uses. in all my criticisms that I've made over the last year and a half, I've noticed when there's some really good things happening, and that's an area where I think there are some good things happening, in all sorts of ways. But those are, I think, rather fundamental services that the city government is expected to provide. Transportation is, which is I view as accessibility, is a very important service to provide well in a reasonable fashion. And all of those are fairly traditional, I suppose, and I guess you're referring to them as hard as opposed to soft. But I have to say that the so-called soft services are really important in this time, in this place, in this city, that making this a safe and a happy place, which it, for most of us, has been and continues to be, is dependent in large part on those kinds of things. And it kind of reminds me back when we were doing the core area agreement in '81, where there's a tendency to say, well, if we put up a building or a structure, everybody can see, look what I did. But if we train 100 people or provide them with jobs they wouldn't have had, or an education they wouldn't have had, or they fix up their houses or something, it's not so obvious in that way, but maybe it's more important to the quality of life and the productivity and happiness of those people. And so we need to find a way of measuring and therefore getting credit for those good things. And actually, Stuart Cladworthy and some of the people at the Institute for Urban Studies did a pretty good job of trying to. Well, actually, I watched a really interesting film, Jan Gale, an architect. One of the things he was quoting was, you should measure what you care about. I like that. And so when you have social indicators, or as the city is trying to do in the reports, where you try and measure, or the police department tries to measure what they're doing, trying to measure those things. If we can measure them, then maybe they'll attract support or criticism or concern, as the case may be, in a way that is more useful than just saying, well, how many miles of road do we have? So on. So in the end, I haven't said one or the other. Really, you need a balance. You need a balance. And then that's the challenge for council. And something which I've said to sort of the others, that people who get elected, they don't necessarily come with any particular background or experience or training. But they do have one thing, they have the unique authority to assign values, because that's what they've been elected to do. And that's what this council has to do. And I mean, I can talk about what I would do as mayor, but I can only do what 9 of us want to do. And so I would look to work with and lead at least 9, but hopefully more, in providing the direction that people want us to do.
Anything else you want to add?
I've gone on and on, haven't I?
No.
What have I missed?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything I want to ask you, so.
I'll give you some things which
Sure.
that use for other purposes. I don't know, you probably haven't been to my website yet.
I was actually.
Oh, did you? Okay, because it's finished yet. Okay.
Yeah.
This is what I did release when I registered. And this is actually on my website about a bunch of things I care about. I've used some of that.
Okay.
And when the CBC asked for some big issues, then this is the way I expressed them. So I thought I'd give you those for your file.
Yeah. No, that's great. I will keep these and add them to it.
And I'd like to thank the association for retaining you to do this. Because before I go, I want to say that I really liked Chris Lorenz's letter and the 6 points put out. I can agree with all of those very happily. So
Okay.
look forward to working with them.
Okay. Thank you very much.